Please join me in welcoming the 73rd President of the Academy and the Joseph F. Cotter Professor of Management and Organizations at the Carroll School of Management, Boston College, Professor Mary Ann Glynn.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm also of Irish background, but Jackie certainly is the authentic deal. But I find we share a common sense of humor and a love of the spirits, if you know what I mean. So, so thank you so very much for the honor of serving as your president this past year. It's been interesting, it's been humbling, it's been exhilarating, and it's been exhausting, all in one fell swoop. Here in the great city of Chicago, as Jackie mentioned, we convened the 78th meeting of the Academy of Management. Quite an accomplishment to have endured that long, and much less to have thrived and even improved lives as we tried to do this year. And I think our annual meeting is our coming together, and perhaps the most visible manifestation of the community that defines us as the Academy of Management. Look around the room. We are here. This is the Academy. This is your community. And it's absolutely vital to what we do in every aspect of the field. So what I'd like to focus on in this time I have is community. And to talk a bit about it and to how we might use it to advance the purpose and meaning of the Academy of Management. In many ways, we are unique as the Academy of Management community, but we are not unique in terms of our ability as a community. We can see ourselves in many other ways as a group of people who gather together with a common identity, purpose, expectations, interests, and perhaps shared resources to do this. But we can draw insight and inspiration from other arenas that also have communities. And I'd like to share with you a research project that's dear to my heart. I've been working on for a number of years with Christy Lockwood, who's here today. A little more than 5 years ago, in April of 2013, tragedy struck at the finish line of the Boston Marathon. But what I want to focus on now is the recovery and the response to that tragedy, because it illustrates the best of community and something we may want to think about emulating. As you can see, this is the cover of Boston Magazine that was issued shortly after the bombings at the marathon. It's a clear representation of that resilience of community, of the power of community. And as the cover notes, each shoe in the photograph is tiny, battered, and ordinary. Together, though, they create something beautiful, powerful, and inspirational. I think it's something that we might try to emulate in a different way here. And the recovery that became known as Boston Strong didn't stop with symbolic representation. There was a lot of activity. Individuals seeking solidarity and emotional connection reached out to others in a variety of ways, both real and virtual. They created a Twitter community of #BostonStrong, and they shared their own reactions and responses and feelings on that medium. The tweets counted in the hundreds of thousands over time. It endures to today, and it peaks every year at the annual running of the Boston Marathon. So it's a community that's vibrant, that's historical, and that has endured over time to some satisfaction of the people who contribute to it and to those who observe in it. And so it's this social connectedness that stands out about what is happening in terms of a community. And much like the individual shoes of the Boston Marathon runners we saw on the cover, and the individual tweets we might count and read as part of Boston Strong, we here at AOM also realize that community matters and is a great source of our persistence, our pride, and our resilience. And that's what I want to explore today. So the core question I ask you to consider is this notion of community. It was virtually on Twitter, but it was also very real to the people who experienced it, and much like ourselves as we come together today on the ground. I want to think about this mission of community, which you will find everywhere at the Academy. And our mission is stated this way: to build a vibrant and supportive community of scholars by markedly expanding opportunities to connect and explore ideas. And I think often it's the latter part of that mission that we focus on, and I want to redirect us a bit to the building of that vibrant and supportive community and answer this question of why community at all? Why do we bother? And so to do that, I looked to three things. One is scholars, and as Anita regularly reminds us, we should double down. We should be scholars. We should research what this is about. The second piece I want to talk about is how community became so central to the Academy. And finally, why does it all matter? The big so what question I learned a long time ago from one of my advisors as a doctoral student. And so to start with the scholarship, as we routinely do, a definition, if you will. Chris Marquis has a robust one where he advances the idea that community consists of the collective relationships among people who share some aspects of identity, expectations, and interests that is historically contingent and persistent through time. And if we look at how we study this in our journals, I've just picked some of the 6 that are among the most popular and looked at the percentage of articles published in a given year that address some aspect of community. It looks something like this. Paul Adler reminds us that community is always lurking in the background of the work we do, and it becomes more visible at times when we explicitly research community. So there's been an uptick over the last 20 plus years, and some of the reason for it is around the 1990s, we had new tools, new ideas that were brought to bear on the study of community. These included things like network analyses, information technology, the recognition that communities exist not only physically, but also as communities of knowledge, of scholarship, and possibilities. And so it looks like this is something that's important to us in terms of our research, and we do it in a wide variety of contexts. You can find nearly every kind of community present in our research. And I think that's a very important idea in that we seem to crave this social connectedness, and we structure opportunities for delivering on it as we do it. As I looked over the research, there was one article that jumped out at me. This is one of the earliest that was published in ASQ in 1966. And it made the case for this, that social relations map onto physical structures, and the physical layout of a community will both reveal and direct much of the social relatedness that goes on to it. The entire article was only 2 pages. Oh joy, to be publishing back then. And it made this observation, and then it showed these photographs of different communities. And at a glance, you can see that they have different kinds of physical organizations laid out on the ground, which presumes something about the kinds of social relations and the connectedness that happens along the way here. So we've moved away from this one-to-one mapping, if you will, of social and physical relationships as we see them, and onto more of the virtual world. As you know, the Academy of Management is launching Connected AOM. We've started the rollout, and we will continue it, and soon it will be in all your mailboxes very, very soon. So our communities are not bound by physical strictures anymore, but virtual ones seem to define us, to contain us, as well as allowing us to express ourselves as a community, much like the hashtag Boston Strong, and much like the hashtags we have around AOM, and don't forget to PIF today. Hashtag 2018 AOM PIF. There you go. So what our scholarship reveals cumulatively, I boil down to a few simple truths and complex challenges. Forgive me, there's a lot to love in the research, but for now, there's a couple of ideas that are real headlines that help us think about community and enact it. A simple one is this: most change happens when people get together as a community. Communities can do far more than we can as an individual. And the early studies of community really emphasized the notions of power and status and decision-making, the influence that a community could have on an issue, a concern, or a set of people. As a result of this, communities enable collective action and change. And they do this especially when the environment is straining. In the case of Boston Strong, there was a collapse of an institution at the finish line. People were no longer supported by what they had come to count on, and they turned to each other, and the community rose to deliver on that promise. At the AOM, we are not in that kind of crisis situation. I don't mean to suggest it, but we are at a turning point, as Jackie alluded to. You know, it's the old, may you live in interesting times idea, and these sure are interesting. You will see a lot of movement, a lot of change coming up, and for that reason, I think community is more important than ever at the Academy, because we see ourselves as a big tent of a community that has sets of communities that live within it. And so now, let's take a closer look at why that's so and how it came to be at the Academy. Like Jackie, I want to take you back in time. Chicago, 1936, cold, snowy December, unlike today. It was then that Jameson, the founder of the Academy, got together with 9 other colleagues and began this idea for an academy. He even predicted at the time that it could amount to something. If he were around today, I'm sure he would be startled but delighted at what it has become and how it has grown. Looking back on the membership over time, you can see that there has been amazing growth since that day. We have over 20,000 members at the moment that constitute our community at AOM. 11,000 of them are here. That's a very powerful engine for change, for improving lives, and for conducting scholarship. As we look over this time frame, there are a couple of phases to it. In the beginning, as it were, we had the founding early growth. It chugged along, but over time, we had more members and more divisions in that classic sense that organization theory has mapped so well. There's a move between specialization, the interests we want to pursue with a certain set of people, and the integration that's required to achieve it, and even more so in the explosive growth and the greater specialization that has occurred over time. So come back with me. 1971, we had 10 divisions, 10, 1,400 members at the time. These are the ones showing them with 2017 membership on them. And at the time, or in the 70s when this division structure emerged, there was a thought that the movement towards a subgroup activity might be constructive and healthy, provided that we all recognize it ties back to looking at varied activities of complex organizations, and that somehow we need to recreate the old camaraderie, which seemed to be slipping away, both in scale and the way that we specialized in terms of our interests and carved ourselves up. And almost immediately, the challenges to community were visible. In the mid-1970s, the Academy observed that what started as an organization from one that had been run and based on close personal friendships became large, diffused, and more impersonal. Instead of having one entrepreneurial organization, there were now 14 or 15 separate ones around the mid-70s. And to meet this challenge of community, to bring it all back together in spite of our separation into divisions, we had 2 vehicles for doing so. One was a journal, and it was originally conceived as a way we could talk to each other, a way that we could communicate our findings, to think about what was possible in the world, to drive on towards future work. And that is the cover of the journal. It's sort of quaintly lovely in its own right. The second way we tried to meet the challenge of community was through the meetings that you enjoyed today. The first one had 24 members. 24. There are that many people in a row or two here, I think, today. And so this idea of regional or national meetings face-to-face was a way in which we could, again, rejoin as a community in spite of the initial separation by divisions. 1971 through 84, we grew a bit more, and we added to the structure of the Times. And so there were more divisions to add, more structures, as it were, more emphasis on the things that had mattered to us. The journal, note the 70s vibe, isn't that cool? And now, because we didn't have those close personal ties, we needed a membership directory, a big book where we could locate each other and figure out how to make those kinds of connections that were important to us. It's interesting to note that those are still the two primary mechanisms of connection that we have today. And we might want to consider, as we move forward, the weight that they're bearing with 20,000 members on them. And so we might want to be creative and take advantage of some of the new opportunities that could tie us together. Especially as we think about the global reach of the Academy. Our membership is in more than 100 countries, and we have grown in terms of the divisions and interest groups that we have. Today it looks something like this. They embed various degrees of interrelatedness among them. And so today still, the big three, as we call them, the anchors, OB, OMT, and strategy, still get a lot of the action and a lot of the membership. They are still our three largest ones. And as new divisions have been added, they've done so largely in connection to these. This figure shows a degree of membership overlap between two divisions. I realize it's more complicated than that, but just think along with me on this dimension for a bit. So in the 70s, we added to this. In the 80s, we added some more. The 90s, once again, and currently the 2000s. And so you can see that they've become constellations of interest populated by people who tend to think alike, talk alike, and probably form great bonds of colleagueship and co-authorship and collaboration. The main divisions themselves have some connection to each other. The most salient one is between OMT and strategy, which is probably not a surprise on the macro end of the world, but they do interconnect with each other as well. And so it seems to me like the divisions that we have created along the way have succeeded in so many ways to capture what goes on and how it happens. And so I offer this to you as an image for thinking about, is this the way we want it to be? Is there another sense of community that we might build over time and as we move into more ambitious endeavors? Because what community involves is a balancing act. There's some tensions between two dimensions of it, just to start with a paradox, if you will. One tension is between growing big and the assumed impersonality that goes along with it. And the other one is staying small because of the personal ties that are so satisfying that endure through time. So big versus small is the first balancing act of community. Another one has to do with the big tent model that we use at the Academy. Everyone is welcome under the umbrella. And I would hate for us to lose that, and I think no one does. But how do we balance that against the diversity that we try to cultivate through the divisions in interest groups, through various task forces, through other kinds of committees that we have? And I've discovered at present there are so many out there that at times we begin to lose track of them. So we may move towards some consolidation. But we've savored the diversity that is both intellectual and geographic and otherwise based to enable the creativity that moves us along as a group. The other way that communities force a balancing act is between the sense of coordination and connection that you saw between journals and meetings that bring us together in dialogue somehow, and also against the autonomy of the divisions and interest groups in particular, but also the committees, the various task forces and work groups. And it's a delicate balance. You don't want the uniformity that drives out what is special about the divisions and what they pursue, but at the same time, you don't want to lose it and become, letting 1,000 flowers of the Academy bloom all in their direction, and we lose our sense of the community that is AOM. And finally, we have a unified vision. I've shared with you the mission, but it really means different things to different people. I've bumped into this regularly as the president. When I thought we'd be on the same page, we sometimes weren't. When people would interpret things in ways that are more ingenious than we could have imagined, we also savored that as well. But it's a difference in terms of how people think about what we do, and we can never assume that we all think alike from all the research we do. So it begs the question, if community building, community formation, community maintenance is so tricky, then why do we do it? Why do we need community? And I think it's vital for a very simple reason that I'll try to explode in a different way. And it's this: we can matter more collectively as a community. So much of what Jackie talked about in improving lives that work towards a better society, a better workplace, a better quality of life for all people is something we might all individually aspire to, but I don't think we can achieve as individuals. I think it takes collective effort of one kind or another, and I think community is a vehicle for doing that. And so in this last piece, I want to think a bit more about why does community matter in spite of the balancing act it requires of us. We have, Jackie also mentioned, we formulated our strategic orientation. By 2022, in just 4 short years, we aspire to do this. The Academy of Management will be the premier global community for management and organizational scholars and for advancing the impact of management and organization science on business and society worldwide. We took a lot of time and trouble to craft this, and it has 2 essential features. One is internally looking, and we've always talked about our members and services for our members and adding value to our members' scholarship, research, and lives. And that's there in the statement of the community for our scholars. But there's another piece that's really important that our members have spoken to us about as well, and that's the idea that we want to do more than become an insular, closed set of people just talking to each other. We want to be outward-facing. We want to see the world. We want to respond to it. We want to do something about it and do what we do as scholars. And so we will be doing that in the years to come. And it's these 2 pieces that we have to keep in productive tension as we move along in order to succeed, in my belief. Advance the community and advance the impact of science as we know it. And so to the first part about community, it might look something like this. In one sense, the meetings and journals, both real and virtual, as we move to digital editions and more activity on other social media, bring us together. We can talk to each other. We can read each other's work. We can see what we're up to. We can learn about something that's really different from ourselves. But I'd ask you to think about, do you really do it? I'm old enough to remember when the journals would land in your mailbox, and there was a sense of excitement as you looked at the cover, which often had a nice picture on it, and then you looked at the table of contents, and it spurred you to say, wow, I hadn't thought about something. Maybe I should dig in and start to think about what I like to think about from a different perspective. So we might try to do that by reaching out to other kinds of disciplines, areas, topics, scholars with which we're not familiar. And to do that, I think we leverage some of the micro communities that we have among us, that there are clearly groups of scholars doing almost anything you might be interested in. And so reaching out to them, learning something different, and essentially getting out of your own comfort zone and building bridges that might link across these different kinds of differences. How can we come up with other vehicles for coordination other than the journals and the meetings that we have? We clearly want to keep them, but are there other ways of connecting so as to build community that we might be more effective in as we move forward? And the second piece of it is a sense of collective action, which is the raison d'etre for being a community for the most part. And the second phase of the strategy statement I just shared with you is that by 2022, we want to build this premier global community in order to advance the impact of science. It's a bold goal, and it really requires us to pivot in our approach from serving our members, serving ourselves, to thinking about how we relate to the real world. We've given awards, as we did this morning, to Herminia Ibarra on the scholar practitioner, people who cross that bridge, but often we don't have enough of them. And when we think about improving lives, we need to have that kind of outreach. We need to think about how do we move towards other kinds of stakeholders, as Ed would advise us long ago, and I think we still have room for growth there. And so I want to leave you with a couple of questions and challenges as you go forth the next couple of days, as you engage in a community, and that you enjoy it, but also learn from it and push ahead. And so what I'd really like you to think about is in an imaginary way, what if, okay? A thought experiment, as Carl Weick might advise us. What if? What if we recognize that as a scholarly community, our responsibilities are not only to ourselves, but to the world we live in? I know we all work mostly as entrepreneurs, trying to advance our own careers, trying to reach the next hurdle in tenure, promotion, advancement of some kind or another, and that we're rewarded for it individually. But in preparing for this, I went back and read every AMR from the past AOM presidents, and nearly everyone says the same thing. And I'm going to fall in the same trap right now, but I think it's a message worth repeating. What are the responsibilities we have to the world, and how do we get out of the closed loop that we live in? The communities and closing the loop is absolutely vital, but moving the community to face the world in important and interesting ways is also that. The second question I want you to think about and say to yourself, what if we stood together as a scholarly community and used our knowledge and research to advance the institutions around us, around the world rather, in need of our help? And last year, Anita had a very impassioned address in which she talked about the problems of the world are often managerial in nature. And we're ones who have the tools, the understanding, the credentials, and the passion for bringing it to bear there. And we talk about this idea of bringing our research to those who need it. But honestly, I think it often comes to, something we say but don't necessarily do. We try to lob it over the fence. It requires deeper engagement. It requires understanding what those institutions are facing and dealing with, and we can find a way in ways that are useful. And the third question I would ask you in the spirit of what if? What if we became, as a scholarly community, more outward-looking to the audiences beyond those of the Academy, to better society and improve lives as we tried to do this year? What if that were our mission, rather than simply publications, notches on our belt, sites on Google, that kind of thing? I know it's hard. I know it's hard to break the system. It's hard to do those things. I consider myself a scholar of institutions, and the one hallmark of those institutions is that they are durable, and they persist through time. But so do we. We're 78 years strong here at the Academy. There should be a way that we can find to do it. And so I challenge you, encourage you, and ask you to ask, what if, in terms of the possibilities. And so we go back again to 1936 Chicago, and I think our founders would see us as fairly unrecognizable today in terms of our scale, our scope, our reach, our interests. It's almost unimaginable, almost unimaginable. 25 years ago, Don Hambrick, when he was president of the Academy of Management, put down this challenge. I would like to see the Academy of Management hold its annual meeting outside of the United States or Canada. I believe such an event would be a pivotal occasion in the life of our organization. So after a year of study, of visiting sites, of hearing our members, of surveying them, in very careful consideration, I am thrilled to tell you that, are you seeing it? In 2025, we go to Copenhagen. I'm so glad you're happy about it. We worked, we sweated, we tried, and we are thrilled as can be. And it'll be wonderful to move ourselves over there, but I think it's such an opportunity for our community to pivot, as Don Hambrick suggested. Let's use it for that purpose. Let's pivot as a community. As we go to Copenhagen, enjoy all that it has to offer, and really kind of change some of the connections that we have among us, and perhaps redefine our community. So my final thought to you is, what if we are that community that can travel to Copenhagen, that can improve the world, that can relate to each other better, that can help us survive consequences as severe as they did at Boston Strong? What if we can simply grow, mature, and achieve our mission, all noble intent? What if we are that committee? What can we do to become that? And today, I would encourage you to collect your first data samples in this thought experiment. Look around the room. Where do you find community? Who is your community? What do you do with this community? So my challenge to you is to begin to define those things, to bring the community alive in a very real sense, not only at the annual meeting, at other meetings, now at our specialized conferences, and also in between the meetings. We have great new tools coming online in technology for ways to do that. So I leave you with this thought experiment. What if we are that community? And so I thank you so much. I want to thank so many people. I'd keep you here for the next 3 days, thanking all the people I should thank, and I know you don't want that, and quite frankly, neither do I. But I would be remiss not to do it. I want to start with my birth family is here, my cousins, my daughter. Without you, I'm nothing. My academic community, people, doctoral students that present and former, whom I think of maternally, if you will, as children, professors whom I call upon as a child myself and always look to their guidance, support, and inspiration. My broader academic colleagues with whom I've collaborated and co-authored, and those I have yet to meet and interact with. And we all wouldn't be here today without our fabulous, generous, hardworking, and amazingly competent headquarters staff. Nancy Urbanowitz and the 36 people in Briarcliff Manor, we all thank you so very much for all the great things you do. So get out there, be a community, get ready to go to Copenhagen 2025. Thank you. Thank you so much. On those days when you feel this temptation, and you sometimes liken the job to whack-a-mole, as you do these things. This is my last act as president, and it couldn't be a greater one. Carol Kulik is your president for the coming year. Carol, it's all yours. Heavier than you think, right? Carol will be fabulous. She has the commitment, the drive, the energy. We've worked together for the last 4 years, and it's been a pleasure. You're in great hands. You'll build communities, and Carol will help take you there. Thank you, Carol, for all the work you're doing.